We know that President Obama has already announced that he's sending an extra 30,000 troops to Afghanistan. That's bringing their total to over 100,000. Of course, the conference tomorrow is all about pressing other countries to do the same. Several countries have already announced they'll send more soldiers. Our own government, for example, not surprisingly, tailing along behind the US as usual, has already agreed to send an extra 1,200. That's adding to the 9,000 troops that we already have there. Regrettably, other countries tomorrow will also announce that they are sending more. But we should be quite clear, whatever those governments agree to tomorrow, whatever they commit themselves to, they are at odds, significantly at odds with public opinion in their countries. Let's just look at a few examples. 71% of the British population want our troops home within a year, a massive majority. 71% of the German population want their country's troops withdrawn from Afghanistan as soon as possible. And 82% of French voters are opposed to their government sending any more troops to that terrible situation in Afghanistan. So, although those countries, those governments are prepared to send more troops to Afghanistan, it's against the will of their populations. France already has over 3,000, Germany already has over 4,000. Nevertheless, the screws are on those governments from Obama to send more soldiers. Indeed, it seems to me that virtually all of the 30-odd countries that have troops in Afghanistan have been pressed into that US project in Afghanistan via their membership of NATO. They're all either NATO members already, or they're aspiring NATO members who want to get into the American club, like Armenia and Georgia. And it's very interesting, if you look at the small print of the troop deployments in Afghanistan, you'll see what this NATO participation actually means. So, for example, Albania has 235 soldiers in Afghanistan. Bosnia has 10, and it's planning to send 100. Estonia has 150, Macedonia 163, Armenia 40. So these are the poorest countries in Europe, potentially now paying the blood price for being in the American camp. I mean, if you think about Bosnia, it hasn't even really got over its own terrible and devastating war, but already in its poverty, it's providing this kind of window dressing for the US war, this kind of facade that this is indeed a popular and massively supported war. But whether these are poor countries or whether they're rich countries like us and France and Germany, it comes down to the same issue. We are fighting a US war in Afghanistan. And I think we have to be absolutely clear about what NATO is and what the role of NATO is. NATO is nothing but the global arm of US foreign and military policy. And our own government, in its normal craven fashion, is hanging on the coattails of US military adventures. It's been doing this since we ceased to be a world power. It's been doing it since the end of the Second World War, and it's ready, of course, to take advantage of the lucrative deals and contracts that will come in the post-war reconstruction. We saw it in Iraq. Iraq was the clearest case of profiteering and asset stripping that you could possibly imagine. The UK was at the heart of that alongside the United States, and no doubt it's waiting to do the same in Afghanistan. So all these high moral justifications that we hear from our government about why we should be in Afghanistan, why our troops should be dying, why we should be killing Afghan civilians, as far as I can see, it's rubbish. It's solely about our relationship with the United States and what we can make out of that process. Now, NATO is currently in the process of devising a new strategic concept. Many of you will remember the last one, which was introduced 10 years ago. That brought us the war on Yugoslavia, then shortly afterwards, of course, the war on Afghanistan, and a remit of NATO intervention across the whole Eurasian landmass. So that was bad enough in itself. What will this new so-called strategic concept bring to the world? Well, I've no doubt that it will be a remit for global military intervention, and I think again it is going to be dressed up as a new humanitarian role for NATO, maybe things about protecting shippings of food and aid and goodness knows what to so-called benighted countries. Maybe it's going to be posing as a kind of kind-hearted police force for the United Nations. Already in the kind of meetings and conferences and statements that are coming forward, you can see that is the way that it's going. NATO reinventing itself as some kind of global force. And I think it's incumbent on us as an anti-war movement, as the peace movement, to oppose and expose those developments and the lies upon which they are built. NATO is a facade for US militarism, and it only brings war. It has never been, and it never will be, an organisation for protection and security. Now, just a couple of days ago, we received a message of support for today and for tomorrow from the European anti-war movement, the anti-NATO movement, and they said something which I thought really summed up the role of NATO. They said, after over 8 years of NATO's presence in Afghanistan, the current situation reflects what NATO truly is, a military alliance designed to impose the will of the Western elites. We should never lose sight of that. I think it's also important to be very clear about where the US is going in policy terms. Afghanistan is one string to it, but there are others as well, and we must be aware of it. On Monday, the White House will request $708 billion for Pentagon spending this year alone. Now that's a figure at an all-time high. And if you also add non-Pentagon so-called defence spending, the total will be over $1 trillion. That's just in 1 year. So where's that money going apart from to Afghanistan? Well, obviously Washington's increased things like lethal drone attacks in Pakistan, for example, as the expenditure there. But I think we should also be aware of what is happening on other continents. For example, the Pentagon will also begin the deployment of 1,400 personnel to Colombia to staff 7 new bases under a 10-year military agreement signed in October last year. So that's new bases, new military personnel in Latin America. And the money will also be spent closer to home as well. This year, the US will also complete new military bases in both Bulgaria and Romania, and that's going to cost $110 million to house at least 4,000 American troops. So they're right there in Eastern Europe. And of course, don't forget Africa. Africa is also the focus of US military interests. The Pentagon, its latest regional command is the so-called New Africa Command, and it's going to expand its activities on and off the coasts of Africa. So again, this real global reach extending internationally. And it's going to go beyond its current counterinsurgency operations in Somalia, Mali, Uganda, and so on. And there's going to be drone flights from a newly acquired site in the Seychelles. So expansion really in all areas on every level. And I think when we look at the way NATO is going, this whole idea of the new strategic concept and so on, that will be designed to cover this US expansionism in Africa and Latin America in the same way that the last strategic concept covered US expansionism into Eastern Europe. So I think we're absolutely right to focus our campaigning on specific urgent issues like the issue of Afghanistan, absolutely crucial. But we also need to be aware as a movement of where these developments are going and plan, so we can plan strategically to ensure that we can respond effectively. So tomorrow we need to make our message loud and clear. We want our troops out of Afghanistan. We're not prepared to pay the blood price, either in British or Afghan blood. But neither are we prepared to condone US military expansionism. whether it's in Europe, Asia, Africa, or Latin America. We must put a stop to NATO expansionism, and we must end UK support for US foreign and military policy. Bring the troops home.